Hello, and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas into what it means to live as a follower of Jesus in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Hey, and thanks for listening in to the Future Christian Podcast. My name is Lauren Richmond Jr., and I'm pleased to be joined by Reverend Nikki Frontz, community and spiritual leader of the Solomon's Porch in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Well, thanks so much for taking some time out of your schedule to be with me today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah. Now, I met you a few times and got to know you just a tiny bit while you were in Denver, in the Denver metro area. And now you're in Minnesota. But tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Yeah. So, new to Minnesota. Moved here in June. Actually came and visited for the second time in the mid-March. Moved here to, change as well as be the community and spiritual leader of Solomon's Porch. I'm ordained with the United Church of Christ. I got ordained in 2017 in Colorado. And so one of the things for our ordination process, we write an ordination paper, talk about what we believe and why we believe it. And the last paragraph of that paper, I kid you not, is about kind of where do I see God calling me to ministry. And of course, I'm one of those people like, yuck, I want nothing to do with traditional local church ministry.
Yeah.
Like, no, thank you. It's not what I signed up for. But I describe this vibrant community that I didn't even know existed at the time, where this community is quirky. This community is open to growth and experimentation and open to receiving what is God doing in the world and how can we do that. This community of where, hey, utilizing our gifts, particularly with a focus around the arts, capital A arts. That's what I look at. And I'm literally describing Solomon's Porch. Now, mind you, I didn't know it existed.
Yeah.
So I described that in 2017 and, staying true to what I think God has me to do. I go into chaplaincy ministry. And then, as the old saying goes, people plan and God bless. Then, I'm led to Minnesota, leading a local church, unique in many ways.
Great. Say that saying again, God. I didn't catch that.
God, people plan and God laughs.
Oh, yeah.
I'm understanding. I believe it's an old Jewish saying, I believe. But so, and the rest is history of, that's exactly where I am.
Awesome. Now, do you mind sharing any about your kind of path to faith or journey of faith?
Yeah, I don't mind. So I'm from South Mississippi. And so journey of faith, religious expression, and life expression and cultural lenses, in many ways they overlap. So I kind of bounced around a little bit as far as, denominational claims of things. I started in a missionary Baptist church. And then, as a kid, teenager, my family decided to go to a Seventh-day Adventist church, and these are all Black churches. Two of the most segregated places, or racially speaking, is churches and cemeteries. So Seventh-day Adventist, and then, of course, product of my environment. I am the good girl in many ways, in many articles, of doing what I'm told. So I started dating this guy, and this guy was baptized Catholic. And so in the particular church I was raised in, there was not a lot of fond opinions about Catholicism.
Right.
And so, of course, being up, going along with what the minister said, I decided to tell this guy I'm dating. I decided to go and convert him and go and save him.
There you go. Good.
Right. I'm like, I'm going to go tell you about why your belief is wrong.
Yeah.
And you can come see the light, right?
Yeah.
But that totally backfired on me, as you can understand and appreciate in many ways. And here's why it backfired. It backfired because I didn't have a stance for myself. I was regurgitating the stances of the people of authority that they'd given me.
Yeah.
I can remember, my baptism being a pretty traumatic experience at 12, 13 years old.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, right? So I say all that to say this, this guy, he basically asked me, why do I believe what I believe? And that was the first time in my life at 19 years old, I was asked that question and I didn't have an answer.
Wow.
And so, it brought me on a path to really discovering and looking at what my faith journey and what are my next steps. And so, of course, I converted to Catholicism. Like, if they're so bad, then let me see what they're about. Let me see what's up here. But I know I'm kind of bouncing around here a little bit. But so at that same point, when I was 19, that's when I had my first vision from God being called to ministry.
Wow.
And so at this point, I'd never seen a female minister.
Yeah, and you're Catholic, right?
Well, I'm about to go Catholic. I'm
Okay.
at the end of it. I'm at the end. And my experience, the ministers that I've seen or been involved with, there's been some misconduct and not a lot of accountability, and it's it just wasn't really healthy situations.
Yeah.
And so when God shows me a vision of myself preaching the gospel, I was like, you got the wrong number. That is not me. Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. And so, converted to Catholicism, started to really develop some language and concepts of my own about what really matters to me about my faith. Why do I still claim and hang on to Christianity? What is it about this homeless carpenter that's traveling around spreading this interesting but pretty unconventional message, especially at the time? So what happened was, I kind of came to the point where you kind of know you're at a stop in your faith journey, particularly within a community or within a organization.
Yeah.
I sat down with, a Catholic priest and, sat down and had a serious conversation of, listen, God's called me to be a minister, and
Wow.
I know my time is short here.
Yeah.
I know that. He's like, well, I mean, of course you get the, hey, could you, you could go to the nunnery,
Right.
go be a
Right.
nun, you can do that. I'm like, I'm married, and I don't plan on not doing that. But it's this, the question I was asking me is, would I stay if women could be ordained?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think I wouldn't, because I feel like I've kind of, that time in my life, that season, it was right where it needed to be, but that season has come to an end.
Wow.
Of, and not saying that Catholicism is not about like low church and social justice, because in many ways they are, and I'm forever grateful for my time being Catholic.
Yeah.
But my time came to an end. So with that, I talked to a mentor of mine, of like, hey, I think I'm called to ministry. And my mentor, he was a Methodist elder, and he took some time and kind of went through, here are the denominations type questions. Because mind you, again, we're still in the South.
Right.
So I wouldn't necessarily, walk into a Methodist church by myself if I didn't know anybody, being a, Black woman in her early 20s.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, but I did walk into Catholic church. So anyway, so one of the things that he said that stuck out, I actually talked to him about this. We had great conversations about this about a year or two ago, is he went through the denominations, and then he showed, this is the United Church of Christ. This is the UCC.
Yeah.
They're the liberal ones. And then he moved on.
Yeah.
It's like, mind you, I'm in South Mississippi. I mean, it isn't like Deliverance is playing in the background, but still, there's still a long way to go when it comes to kind of social views. And so my background is in music. So, I majored in voice in college. And so I did, musical theater shows and did a lot of performances and had a lot of friends. And many of my friends were part of the LGBT community. And I could just remember for a lot of my friends, just a lot of struggles of faith and acceptance and safety, particularly in South Mississippi. And I could just remember just kind of deep in my yearning soul in the early mid 2000s, like, why are we having a dialogue and debate, particularly in our church communities, about people's dignity, worth, and acceptance based on who God created them to be?
Yeah.
And it was big there. It was a big deal there in many places in the other places in the country. But I can remember, many of my friends, like, the best I'm going to get is, because God doesn't love me, the best I'm going to get is to be able to be in relationship with someone else on the side because I'm shameful for who I am.
Wow.
Like, I'm never going to have a spouse of my own. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case for everybody, of course, but I remember a particular friend that would sneak out in the middle of the night to meet other married men. And this is kind of the best, that this is just what we're going to get. This is all we got.
Yeah.
Because I am not loved. I am not worthy to be loved.
Wow.
I am a sin. And immediately I was thinking, I mean, not in a like savior complex way, or maybe I should evaluate that, but it was, well, who's your minister? Who's with you, helping you navigate through these, really, really, hard choices and hard, how do we how do we treat people with dignity instead of just, hey, you're not loved. And so because of that, I'm not going to go any deeper to try to be helpful, to try to look at you as a human, to try to remind you that God loves you too. I don't think, and if this is the case, I would walk away. I don't think when Jesus was roaming around, if someone in his camp was of the LGBT community, I don't think he would say, go away, you abomination, and that's it.
Yeah.
And if so, I'll gladly hang everything up. Gladly.
Wow.
So, I mean, I say all that to say I try to be someone to see people, to really see them.
Yeah.
Not to see who they love, not to see their gender, gender and sex as this is the only part of your story.
Right.
It is a big part, but it's not the only part. I try to see the humanity. And sometimes I do really well, and sometimes I absolutely #fail.
Yeah.
Fail! But I don't know. I think, to me, that's what Christianity is for me. You like how I got back to your questions, huh?
Yeah.
Of seeing the humanity in one another, of doing our best that we can, whatever that looks like in whatever situation, and following the teachings of Christ, even when we're not at our best. And even when we fail of following the teachings of Christ, Jesus Christ, we get back up. We get back up and try again. And we're being honest with ourselves and with the people that we're called to serve, and honest of what does redemption really look like.
Yeah.
And how do we each and every day practice that in our lives, receive that and give that?
Well, let me ask you that then. What is one of those ways that you've been able to practice that?
Let me start by saying it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. For me, it looks like when someone has wronged me, and it looks like me going to them. And before I go to them, really searching my heart and soul of what happened, why did it happen, how did it make me feel, what do I think needs to happen to make things right, what is the worst thing that can happen if I go talk to this person, what are my expectations, and then after that, really, and this might sound like a cop-out, but I really feel this way. It's like, hold it in love and release it to God of, okay, God, I'm going to go talk to this person about this situation that happened. And maybe they'll hear it.
Yeah.
Maybe they will. But if they don't, does that matter to me? And why does it matter to me? So it's really, really asking those deep, heartfelt questions for myself, because I'm a process person, and to understand what does worth it look like. And if it looks like me telling that little Nikki Darlene in my soul that I stood up for you, I said something. I let them know how that made you feel. And maybe by saying that out loud, maybe or maybe not, they can make things right with you. But I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can, Minister Reverend Nikki Darlene Frontz, to make things right for you.
Wow.
Because ministry starts at home. If we're going to advocate for other people, we have to be able to advocate for ourselves.
Yeah.
So by going, but in redemption too it's about, and if I go to the same person and they're totally like, no, I stand by what I said.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. I'm not hearing what you're saying. That's the holding it in love and releasing it to God. They're not hearing what I'm saying, but I said it.
Yeah, this is good stuff, folks. This is good stuff. Thank you for sharing that, Nikki. That's really good.
Of course.
Let's talk about what you're doing now. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing so much about your story of faith. That's wonderful. So, as I mentioned from the top, you're now the community and spiritual leader at Solomon's Porch. And the first question I've got to ask is, what is it like taking on a new job? New church job during COVID.
Oh, man. This is my first church gig.
Yeah.
So there's that. So I don't have anything to compare it to, like, other church jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, I'm one of those church people that said I'd never be in the church, right?
Biggest mistake, right?
And then, God laughed. Like, funny, you're gonna run one during a pandemic. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. It is. It is a lot of crisis management. Crisis management. Not saying that this is a terrible community and everybody's always in turmoil.
Right.
No, this is saying that there's a global crisis here.
Yeah.
And transition is already pretty traumatic anyway.
Yeah. Great point.
And just on a normal day.
Right.
Let alone that, hey, we're really, really, we can't meet together for one of our first services, me as community and spiritual leader. That's a big ask, but it's, it's that, as well as it gives a lot of space for experimentation.
Yeah.
And which is what is a big strength about Solomon's Porch. We are a group that is founded on experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of who we are and how we function in life. So, I look at it, so I'm a musician, I look at it as, I look at it as like a jazz chart, right? You have your basic melody, kind of like, here is a way to think about this idea.
Yeah.
And then you have some chords behind it. And the only thing that you're really tied to is, how do you start the song and how do you end it? Anything else in the middle, you just kind of, in many ways, feel it out, depending on if you have a chart in front of you, depending on what people and their musical gifts are, depending on what people want to say with their instruments.
Mm-hmm.
And I say all that to say, it's in many ways unconventional compared to, like, classical music where everything is structured out.
Right.
Everything, including what instruments play where, when do they stop, when do they start, how loud are they, how do we start the music, how do we end the music. Like, everything is pretty scripted in most, if not all, classical music. But I say all that, I draw that parallel to, I look at it as ministry, So I would say, if we wanted to draw the parallel, I would say maybe classical would be more kind of higher church, maybe Catholic church, some Episcopal churches, and so on and so forth. And then like atonal jazz would be Solomon's Porch. It's just, you look at it like, I don't know what the heck is going on, but it's interesting. But then, there's some elements there that, okay, that's kind of familiar. I kind of understand what's happening, but it's like brilliant, but messy, but inspiring.
That's a good analogy for church.
But it's like, I don't know what's happening here. I can't put you in a box.
Yeah.
And that's how we operate in the world. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's I don't know, just the impermanence of it all. That's what kind of keeps us together.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Well, let me ask you kind of, I want to ask about your title, because I noticed, and I was kind of curious, like you're not, unless I'm misunderstanding, you're not called a pastor, but you're called a community and spiritual leader. So I'm curious, maybe I'm reading into this too much, but I'm curious about if there's a distinction and what that distinction is.
I think it's worth to ask the question. So here at Solomon's Porch, we, we like to reimagine, reimagine titles, reimagine how we do church, reimagine how we are of service to the community.
Yeah.
And one of the ways of reimagining is, what are some ways that we call our leaders of our community, like call them, like refer to them and their work that they're called to the community. So like, I'm the community and spiritual leader, my basically youth pastor, she's our children, youth, and families advocate. My pastoral care pastor, basically, she is our engagement curator. So
it really is about reimagining what these things look like.
Wait, say that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's really about reimagining what these roles look like. Yes.
Yeah. So to answer your question about pastor, I look at them as one and the same. Shepherding a community, helping to, guide and focus and, mission and vision, and help to how are we being a benefit and a blessing to the world? What does that look like? How are we doing it? So I look at them as one and the same. So there's some people that, as you can appreciate, in many ways, there's some people that have baggage around the word pastor.
Yeah.
There's some people like, I was even one of them. Like, I was like, oh, I'm going to be the cool person and never even mention it. But there's this, sometimes I feel like I'm just like this little girl in like these big pants, put my big girl pants on. And it's more of like, no, I am the pastor, the shepherd of this community, as well as, and that also means a community and spiritual leader. So with that, Solomon's Porch, we're so many things, right? Of, yes, you have the spiritual community or the church community that comes on Sunday nights, baptism, communion, all the, the Christian stuff, in a traditional, quote unquote, way. And then we have Solomon's Porch of people that may or may not identify as Christian, and yet just really likes to hang out with us. Maybe they come to our, our events at people's houses, like our happy hours and our, other events like that, our plays. The arts are the way that we do life, as well as, so, maybe our art gallery openings, they're there, as well as we have our yoga sanctuary, which is one and the same as Solomon's Porch, where that's not necessarily religiously affiliated in a traditional sense. It's a yoga studio. An amazing yoga studio that does a lot of activism in the community and support. And so then we have our Faith, Health, and Wellness Center that consists of our, what do our healers look like. We have acupuncture. We have therapy of how are we caring for our community, not only here at Solomon's Porch, but beyond. So it's one and the same for me. And yet in many ways it's kind of different too. So,
well, yeah, I think that makes sense. Now, as you mentioned, you haven't been on this job super long, but I'm curious, like, what have you noticed for yourself or maybe for your church community? What's been your biggest challenge?
I'd say the biggest challenge is balancing the what does it look like to be in person question. It's that, and all of us, and many of us feel that in our hearts of we want to be together, in the way that we work.
As we're recording this, it's mid-August, basically. And I know, Nikki, as I've talked about this with some of my good friends, colleagues in ministry, and I know we've talked about how back in March, it seemed like the hard decision was when to shut down. And now really the hard decision is like, when do you go back in person? What does it look like? How safe is safe?
Right. And the fact of, so in August, particularly here in Minnesota, the amount of new cases of COVID-19 are still climbing.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yes, technically, according to the state, with precautions in place, including a COVID preparedness plan, as well as having limitations of the amount of people in our sanctuary space and looking at what does air filtration look like. And, here in Minnesota, in public spaces, we're required to have masks. We'll be wearing masks unless, I want to say, under 5 years old, as well as unless there are other medical conditions that permit people from wearing masks. So, it's, and I've talked to some of my pastor colleagues about this. It's that kind of pit in your stomach of being a pastor of a community that, your special charge. This community, God has called you to lead, and everyone's looking to you like, we want to be together. We want to, particularly in my context here, is we want to celebrate that we're together now. It's hard of being quarantined and then looking around. It's like, well, what is the impact of the quarantine? When you're seeing these numbers increase, and then, speaking from the pastoral perspective of my absolute worst fear is a COVID outbreak here, even with the best of intentions.
Yep.
I got people that do have underlying medical conditions.
Right.
I have people that, no one deserves to be sick.
Yeah.
So one is enough.
Yeah.
Again, as Jesus says.
Yeah. I like your point you mentioned of that role of shepherd, kind of caring for your sheep. It's hard to want to purposely put someone at risk, right?
Right.
I'm curious, like, what do you think, America's been going through this for several months now. I had to speak live for a networking group event over Zoom, and I was laughing how nervous I was. So I was thinking about how I hadn't spoken live because my church has been recording in like months since basically March. And I keep thinking about and wondering, what are the long-lasting disruptions going to be to church specifically? And I'm curious if you've given thought to that or seen foreshadows, I wonder, even in your time.
Long-lasting disruption.
Yeah, I'll say, like, technically I'm a member of 2 gyms, and I haven't gone to either in, 6 months, and I probably won't go to a gym until maybe there's a vaccine. And to that point, I'll have been so used to and so adapted to working out in my basement, for instance. Will I need a gym membership again?
I don't know. I'm hung up on the word disruptions, and maybe this is my optimistic view on things.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, so I guess I'd say, I don't know. I guess it's that reimagining piece of, I would say, long-lasting adaptation.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
I think that our country and many countries throughout the world has an intimate view of what it's like to be shut in. And I have hopes that, not necessarily for the traumatizing part of it, because it's extremely traumatizing, but more on the lines of remembering our neighbors. I hope that we don't forget that because of those that are shut in our communities.
Well, I like the way you're looking at it of how can we learn from this going forward.
Yeah, that's kind of how I know for me particularly, what's really, really resonated of this time of quarantine and not being able to be together like many of us would ideally want to.
Right.
It's forced us to have different ways of looking at things. I have some people in my community that suffer from mental illness, and being in person anyway is a feat for them.
Yeah.
And so by having a Zoom option to be able to come and participate and be in community, it means a lot. And that was kind of one of the first things I talked to one of my covenant participants about, or members. That's all.
Yeah.
Of like, it's this. Some days I just don't feel like getting out of bed, but I don't want to be alone.
Yeah.
So, and as you know, the Minnesota winter is fierce.
I don't, thankfully.
Well, maybe you heard. Okay, fine. You heard. Word on the street. I don't know. I'll let you know how it goes. But some people don't, some people are like, no, I don't want to be involved in that, For me, one thing I appreciated is before being here at Solomon's Porch, I was a chaplain at a retirement home. And, just even with the best of intentions, with a wonderful staff, with, some of the families being supportive and present to our elderly residents, some not so much. It's this ministry of the forgotten. I think of in many instances in our society, we tend to forget about our elderly as far as how important and loved and seen that they are or can be. And I think that, bridging back to your question of, hopefully the pandemic helps us to see those that are forgotten, those that are left alone, and those that aren't always seen as much.
Yeah. I just want to highlight your broader point there about looking at it as a time of adaptation, because I just think, Nikki, like that's a mentality that so many leaders and churches are going to need to get through this. So
Yeah.
I just want to emphasize that. Let me shift gears just real slightly here. Something I've been dying to ask you. So you mentioned you're ordained in the United Church of Christ. I'm ordained in the Christian Church of Christ. Two kind of, I guess, we're kind of sister denominations in some sense, I think. And it sounds like you're fairly new, or you're not a lifelong UCCer, I guess, right?
No, I'm all around the gambit, man. I told you. I signed up because my mentor said those are the liberals.
So yeah, I'm definitely not a lifelonger in the DOC, as we call it, and I'm curious, like you're working now for a non-denominational church, and I imagine, like me, you probably noticed, like, the trends are obvious. Denominational churches are struggling, in many instances declining, and I've noticed this trend of kind of these progressive evangelical churches, and I'm just kind of curious, like your own thoughts on, how do you see these trends going? Do you think your situation is kind of just a one-off, or do you think it could be emblematic of things to come?
I mean, if we based on and looked at, evangelical, more conservative churches, and in the context of kind of where I come from, particularly in like Mississippi and, the South, there are a lot of evangelical churches that are independent, as well as, conservative churches that are part of a denomination but don't have the name, right? That are in relationship, particularly like Southern Baptist is real big down there. I think that what that would be interesting to see more of, particularly in our more moderate / left-leaning or more liberal churches, particularly mainline.
Yeah.
What could it look like if we, let go of names of our churches? As far as like, I know, I'll be that person.
Yeah.
I'll be that person. What could it look like? Is it a hindrance to us? Can we still be in relationship and in community, but not have the name of our, our denominational?
It's like we're not going to be First Methodist Church or First UCC Church, or
at least, I mean, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying it all goes away, because
right.
Because it's so funny. So Solomon's Porch it's so many things, right? For some people, this is their connection to community, spiritual community in this way. Others, this is their other church. We meet on Sunday nights.
Yeah.
So some of our community, they go to church on Sunday mornings at another church that has maybe the denominational connection.
Yeah.
For some, this is an alternative. For others, this is the only way. For others, I want nothing to do with that spiritual stuff.
Yeah.
I think it could be a trend of more communities like Solomon's Porch existing and coexisting with, more traditional denominational churches. I know for me, it's like, it's kind of interesting for me. I'm actually working on transferring my UCC standing from, Colorado to Minnesota. And so in order to do that, I mean, yes, ordination happens, and, nothing can ever change that. But in order to be an authorized minister, to have voice and vote of things that go on regarding the United Church of Christ here in Minnesota and beyond, there are steps I have to take. Yeah. And one of those steps, true story, one of those steps is I have to be a member of a United Church of Christ congregation.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So this Sunday, I actually joined a local church here in Minneapolis.
Wow.
Yeah. So I am a member of a church, and I am a pastor of a church community nonprofit. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
this is a church thing, spiritual community.
Well, that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Well, let's take a break and we'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Reverend Nikki Frontz and some closing questions you can take as seriously or not as you'd like to. So, the first question is kind of relevant, it sounds like. If you're Pope for a day, do you have one thing you'd like to accomplish?
I would love to have maybe an evening. I'd like to have an evening with Pope Francis that involved wine and cheese.
Oh, I love
and playing music and going into what the hell are we going to do about this world?
Oh,
what do we need to
man.
call? That's what I want to do.
That is like, Nikki, that's the best answer I've gotten so far.
I am such a fan of oh, thank God.
It's great. It's great. All right. What theologian or historical Christian figure would you want to bring back to life?
Oh, man, this is so hard. So I'm going to go a slightly different direction here with this question.
Yeah. Oh.
I look at Bell Hooks as a theologian. I would love to have I'd love to have great conversations with her, particularly around the oppression Olympics, as well as I want to meet Rabbi Harold Kushner. Many of his books really helped me in my faith journey. I would love to sit down and have meaningful dialogue with him. And
I didn't realize he was deceased, so I'm disappointed to hear that. I'm curious, Phyllis Tickle, perhaps you read her, there's an evangelical guy, Brady Shearer, talks kind of similar language about this being like the biggest shift in 500 years we're living through. What do you think history will remember us for this time and place?
If I wanted to take the lens, because back to the Christian land, looking at it in that lens, I would say that's when kind of the corporate Christianity in this season, particularly in the Americas and the world. Well, not that it wasn't before, but I mean, this is the start of the schisms and the creation of the denominations. This is like post-Reformation,
right?
So yeah, I would say a lot of like I think of I've tried to find this tool actually, and I think it's not even accurate anymore. A tool of like all the denominations and how they splintered and why they splintered and what does it mean to splinter, and as you can understand what we're seeing now of the United Methodist Church and where they're going, the Lutheran Church and where they've gone. I would say corporate Christianity, and maybe even, I don't know, this is kind of my hopeful thought here, of maybe even kind of like a back to basics of looking at what does it look like to start over. Maybe there's some places that are doing that, and what does starting over mean and look like.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for our time today, and really enjoyed our conversation. Where can people find out more about you and the work you're doing there?
Sure. I'm appreciative of your time. It's pretty great. It's a really great conversation today. People can find me at solomonsporch.com.
Mm-hmm.
We are working on a website update, so y'all don't judge us, okay? Don't judge us. I know y'all. I know y'all, folk.
Well, Nikki, don't feel bad. I was looking at my church's website today, and I'm like, this is just completely irrelevant because it's based on meeting in person.
I know. You know what? Hey, I embrace that. We're in the season. It is what it is, but
Good
it's
for you.
Stay tuned.
And I'm sorry, I interrupted. Keep going.
I appreciate you. Good luck. I'm glad that this podcast exists because it's very relevant. We need to understand where we've been and take a look at where we are and where we're going.
Well, awesome. Thanks again, and peace be with you.
And also with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. But hey, before you go, do us a favor, subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.